Is anyone experiencing any AV-ish weirdness? Everyone good? Okay, cool. I like to double check because, it's not like we're talking in air. We're talking in electron space. Cool. So with that, I'd love for our amazing panelists to kick off some introductions of themselves before we go into questions. And how I like to do this in Zoom is I nominate someone and then that person tosses the baton to someone else that they nominate. It also keeps people on their toes. So I'm going to nominate Julie to introduce herself first. Julie, can you say who you are, where you're Zooming from, your current position, and maybe just a little bit about like how you found your current position, how you found yourself there.
Yeah, totally. So, hi everyone. My name is Julie Tlosig, and I'm a UX designer at Amazon. I work on our Echo Show products, which is our lineup of Alexa devices that have screens. And I'm zooming in from Greenwood, Seattle. I graduated from SVC's UX program in January of last year, and I got hired into my design role at Amazon in March of last year as well. So I'm about a year into my job now. And yeah, my position, like kind of learning about my current position was definitely like a unique situation for me at the time as I was making a career transition into design. I've been at Amazon for a total of 6 years now, and previously I was an executive assistant supporting design teams, which is how I got exposed to UX design in the first place. So pretty much at the exact same time that I started going to school at SBC, I started supporting a new design team and 3 design directors. So the timing for me was like really perfect actually. And I was really upfront with my directors from the beginning and letting them know that I was going to school for design and that I wanted to make a career transition after I graduated. So they were super supportive and they knew about my career goals when I was joining the team, and they were just excited that I was passionate about design and the space that they were in. So I had their support along the way, and I just kept them up to date where I was at with school. So when I graduated, they were like, "We hope you're considering staying at Amazon, and we'd love to like do a portfolio review," because they did have a few entry-level roles open in the org that they were considering me for. So yeah, it just kind of unfolded really organically for me as far as just finding out positions that were available at Amazon since I was already there. And let's see, I will pass it off to Chris.
All right, thank you. My name is Chris Keimig. I graduated from SVC's UXCP UX certificate program in September of 2020, began my job hunt shortly thereafter, and was just hired last month actually as a CX design strategist at Premera Blue Cross, which is a not-for-profit health insurer here in the Pacific Northwest. CX, it's pretty similar to UX. It's sort of designing across all the various touch points that customers might have with Premera Blue Cross as a brand. So that's from the website to their interactions with their providers to marketing materials that they might receive. Pretty much any interaction you can imagine having with a health insurance company, I've sort of got my hands in now. I do some like hands-on UX work as well, but it's a kind of unique role in that I'm strategizing around not just the web presence, but also sort of like internal processes and various parts of the business as well. My path to UX was really kind of winding. I think like a lot of other people in the UX field, I did not come from like a traditional tech background. I began my career as a writer, My work as a writer led me to teaching, and it was through teaching that I sort of stumbled into human-centered design. I spent about 5 or 6 years building experiential learning programs at an independent high school out in New York City. And when I moved to Seattle, really wanted to find a way of doing more of that kind of user-centered design work. And I came to SVC because I had been doing a lot of that kind of work in an analog space, but was really kind of an outsider when it came to tech, speaking the language of tech, and came to SVC really to sort of help launch me into my job search from a place of relative strength, as opposed to sort of, waving and pointing to my past experience and trying to convince people that it was relevant to the spaces I was trying to break into, which I still had to do a fair amount, but SVC and my time here really made that transition as smooth as possible. Yeah. Oh, and how I stumbled into this position. So I moved to Seattle a couple of years ago. My professional network here on the West Coast, though, was like pretty thin, and attending SVC was a really helpful part of sort of building out my professional network here, both in terms of connecting with classmates, instructors, mentors like Alex, and so on. Because my network was pretty thin, and Larry may tell you not to take this approach when it comes to searching for jobs, but I basically bombarded the earth and all of LinkedIn with applications, resumes, cover letters, and so on. Applied to a lot of jobs. This job that I actually landed in was just by chance the first job that I applied to. My first time through, I interviewed with them back in November, and things went well, but the job ended up going to an internal candidate. I stayed connected to the team, to the hiring manager, to the recruiter, a couple of other people, and when another role opened up in February, they actually reached out to me, and kind of went through a very abbreviated version of the process again. And ended up landing there. But I did a lot of interviewing in the couple of months prior to that, which I'm excited to talk about tonight. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Can you hand the baton?
Sure. Yes, I will hand the baton to Ariel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I'm really excited to meet all of you and hear from all of you. I also just really appreciate Larry and Mariette and Fiona for inviting me to be on this panel. This is really awesome. So my name's Ariel Green. Ariel pronounced like the letters R-E-L, and green like the color, so that part's easy. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary as a UX writer at Nordstrom. I've been there about 1 year and 3 months. And shout out to Katie, who I know has also been a UX writer at Nordstrom, and I saw she's on this call. So I've lived in Seattle for 3 years, and before I lived here, I lived in Brooklyn, and I was working for museums and nonprofits. And so totally a career shift like many others on this call. So I guess what I want to focus on today is that if any of you are feeling like totally freaked out and like crisis of confidence and just like burnt out and scared and not sure you're even on the right path, I totally empathize with that. I started out on the UX journey like not even sure. I signed up for the program and went forward, but I had no idea that it was really a right fit or not. It just seemed like a good thing to do. And it turns out I absolutely love it. And I also didn't know I was going to end up focusing on writing, but that has been a perfect place for me as well. So yeah, I feel my road has been rough, not as rough as some. I've had a lot of support and a lot of luck, but yeah, I empathize with anyone who's feeling, who's struggling or feeling worried about how they're doing. So I guess I don't want to go like take too long, but just quickly about how I ended up at Nordstrom. I think like one thing that really set me apart is that I was just super motivated to get hired. While I was doing the UX program at SVC, I was working all kinds of odd jobs, like super frustrated by my career, how my career was going, and like really frustrated with my financial situation. So I was just like, this is going to happen. I'm going to get a job no matter what it takes. Felt like I really put myself out there. I took the advice to just start sending out tons of applications, even though I really didn't feel ready. And then I ended up hearing from a recruiter at Facebook that they were interested in interviewing me for a content role, which I hadn't really thought about, but it kind of realized it was a good fit. And while I started on that process, I reached out to Nordstrom and actually applied for a role that was a higher level than I was really qualified for, which was scary, but worked out in the end. And they ended up hiring me at the entry. So they like changed the level for me to make it entry level. So I think that was a cool part of the story as well. So yeah, that's me. And of course, I'd love to hand it over to Maria.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Morgan, and I'm a UX UI designer with Green Rubino, which is an advertising agency in Seattle. I graduated SVC, the UI certificate program and I had to think about this, it was August 2019, which feels like 100 years ago. But graduated August 2019 and got the job with Green Rubino November of 2019. So interviewed here and there, eventually found Green Rubino, which I love. I'm super happy there. I'm excited to share my experience today because I think I took kind of a more unique approach of how I ended up where I was. And once I decided to change my priorities of what I was looking for in a job. A little bit more about my journey and how I got here was I started out as a visual designer for a restaurant company in Seattle. I was an in-house visual designer for them. I felt like my skills were maybe lacking a little bit. I had worked with them for 4 years. I felt like I'd plateaued a little bit. So started with me just wanting to take an extra class, feel inspired, and which led me to SVC, which led me to the UI program, which I fell in love with. And now I'm a UI designer, which is great. My job is kind of interesting. So I'm a UX UI designer within a web department in an advertising agency. But when I was hired, they saw that I had so much visual design background that I actually straddled 2 departments. So I'm primarily in the web department as a UI designer, but I get pulled in all the time to be in the creative department, which is kind of my dream scenario because I never fully wanted to get away from print and visual design. And in an advertising agency, there's always tons of stuff to do and always the more creative, the better. So I've gotten to do a lot of fun projects. And when web team is a little bit slower, I get in creative and always doing kinds of different stuff. So excited to share my experience with you guys today. And I think that is there anyone else to hand off to? I think I'm the
No, you rounded us out. Thank you so much, Maria. Yeah, thank you, Ariel, Chris, Maria, Julie. It's so awesome to have you sharing your stories today. I think something that you said, Ariel, really stood out to me, the term crisis of confidence. I think that so many of us, definitely including me, have had at kind of our user journey of becoming a UX designer, have had pain points along the way that can totally be characterized as crises, multiple of confidence. And I think that one of those really is this transition point into being one of you, the tale, your story, right? The tale of the newly hired. And so what I really love and appreciate about us in this panel creating space for is some of that kind of honest conversation, because it can feel sometimes, I mean, very exciting and delightful, especially to get to where you are now, but also really, really challenging sometimes. So thank you for getting us started in that direction, all of you. Before we transition into kind of conversation and question asking, I have a 2-part ask. Fiona's already Brady bunched us into our panelist chairs. As you can see, we're all up here in front of you together. But for the panelists, please now take a moment to drop the link to your portfolios so that everyone in the audience can just have it for their perusal after the panel or during, just so that they can kind of reference where you're coming from and a little bit about your work as we talk through questions. And then as the panelists are doing that, audience, maybe some of the things from the introductions have piqued your curiosity, maybe something they said or an industry that they mentioned. Like, I really loved Chris's call out about CX, that term, because it's a huge growing term right now in our industry. And I think that some of you may end up in roles that actually don't reference UX, but reference CX, similar to like what Ariel said about content. So if you have questions for the panel before I launch into questions, I would love you to drop your thoughts and questions into the chat, and starting now. Because I will use that to tailor the conversation and also to kind of popcorn things up into the stream as we go. Cool. So I see everyone's portfolios are in there. Awesome. So just to get us started and pulling from some of the things you all already discussed, I think you all kind of discussed some of your interview process and kind of what you went through a little bit, as well as your kind of job hunting process. So maybe we can start there a little bit. So I'm going to put myself into maybe a little bit of maybe where you all were in that mental headspace of maybe you were starting to wrap up your program, whether it was SVC or something else, because our audience can be from a really diverse background. And then you were starting, you're sitting at your computer or wherever and starting to apply for jobs. As you were doing that, what were some of the challenges or issues that you ran into? And take a moment to think about that. But I'm actually going to pick on Chris first, because Chris, you, in your introduction, talked about, and this is just a term that I learned from someone else. It's a silly term, but a kind of spray and pray approach. Can you tell me a little bit about like what were the good and bads about that? Because I wonder if a lot of people in our audience are thinking about that, not thinking about that, thinking, oh, I shouldn't do that. So maybe we can start with you, Chris.
Yeah, sure. And I should say it wasn't the only approach that I was taking. Like, I was also doing my best to sort of build a network locally and to leverage the contacts that I did have in Seattle and around Seattle to try to unearth positions that might potentially be a good fit. But I couldn't only do that. So I found myself, applying a lot of times through LinkedIn to lots and lots of jobs. I was casting kind of a wide net when it came to the kind of job I was looking for. Given my background, I was looking at UX writing jobs, I was looking at UX design jobs, and I was also looking at strategy jobs. And so I would say the upside of that kind of approach was I found myself having lots and lots of low stakes conversations with recruiters who may or may not have been interested in me at all, but there was something in my portfolio or my LinkedIn profile or something that gave them the idea that I might be an okay fit. I came to realize that these conversations, some of them went really well and went somewhere, some of them went really well and went nowhere. But it gave me a lot of practice in telling my story, and really kind of like honing and refining the sort of elevator pitch that I was trying to give about my experience. And it also gave me the chance to try out, because I was sort of exploring a number of different avenues. It gave me the chance to explore a number of different angles and ways of framing my experience, until I felt really comfortable doing that. And, you know, I would have a couple of recruiter calls scheduled almost every morning, it seemed, for a month or two, and I would be really excited about them, and I'd hop on and I would just kind of chat, you know, and I wouldn't get so anxious and hung up about every single interaction and every single thing I said to them. And, you know, when you're able to relax and settle into yourself, I think you generally perform much better in those kinds of settings, right? So that was an advantage of it. I felt like I got a lot of experience. And I also feel like interviewing for me became a form of networking. Like I built a decent network just from interviewing for a bunch of different roles. And I came to realize that, you know, after going through the process for a number of different roles, that just because you don't land a role doesn't mean it didn't go well, and doesn't mean it wasn't a valuable experience. So there were like lots of interviews I did where I made sure, even if at the end of it, you know, they said to me, you know what, Chris, we liked you a lot, but we're going to hire an internal candidate, or we liked you a lot, but we're going to hire this person coming from Facebook. I made sure to connect to that person on LinkedIn afterward, made sure to like keep the lines of communication open with them. And that's actually how I ended up getting my job in the end, was being revisited by someone, by a company with whom things had gone pretty well the first time, but it just wasn't the right time for that role. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great, Chris. And what I appreciate what you just said, in a few awesome strokes there, was about the storytelling, right? And getting reps under your belt around practicing, because you realize that, you know, so much of our profession is storytelling, and you are in a sales position, right? When you're in these conversations, you are selling, and selling can be uncomfortable. And so when you have practice, you can turn that discomfort into something that's enjoyable. So I appreciate you talking and digging into that. Anne was a little curious about working with recruiters in that process. Maria, Julie, Ariel, did any of you work or talk with recruiters at all? No?
I talk to recruiters. Not so much success, but I guess my philosophy is literally talk to everyone and anyone, which I think I heard Chris sort of say too. And so I was like, well, recruiter is a road, like, let's go down, let's see what can be here. And I think the outcome was much like Chris was saying, practice. I got to practice like presenting and getting some feedback. But other than that, it wasn't particularly helpful for me. It seems my experience with recruiters in general is that they have a lot of contractor roles. And so if that's something that sparks your interest, that might be a better fit.
Yeah, I didn't work with a recruiter for my current position, but I did work with a recruiter for a different company that I was interviewing with. And yeah, I had great experiences with the recruiter there. I thought it was also really important to build that relationship. So I've always had good experiences with recruiters.
I didn't work with any recruiters either, but I totally agree. The more people you can kind of talk to, the better. It never hurts. At the very least, you get practice out of it. So.
Awesome. And I'll add to these really great points that, you know, after all these years of time in the field and seeing how recruitment has evolved, like 5-6 years ago, I would say a lot of recruiters wouldn't give you very high level or very in-depth feedback, like someone who's a hiring manager or a director of UX, like in your division that you might work for. But they've gotten better at knowing like what to look for and what feedback to give. At the same time, like a lot of the feedback will be different than like an actual UX designer or content designer that you might get in conversation with. So yeah, this is awesome that you all have this kind of diverse experience. I want to dig in a little bit. So we talked a little bit about, applying to different things and recruiters, not recruiters. I want to get into like preparing for actually like going into the application process and the hiring process. Before I do that, I want to hear a little bit about, because I think, you can apply through LinkedIn, you can apply through stuff. How did any one of you find a job or land a job through networking or drive an opportunity there? Maybe it wasn't listed. Did any one of you make that happen?
I can go. Oh, go ahead.
You go first.
So I don't know if this is necessarily networking, but the job I currently have now was not posted. I'd been talking to a couple people and asking out, and I reached out to my company, just asking about if they were hiring for a position that I was not qualified for, but I pushed myself and reached out anyway. And they said, well, you're not qualified for this job, but we love your portfolio. We love your resume and talking to you. And we talked amongst ourselves and we decided that our agency does need a UX UI designer. So they had me come in. Yeah. That's not saying it's going to work for everybody, but just because, how do I phrase it? Like a job doesn't have to be posted for a job to exist. You can kind of dig your way in and make jobs exist by just showing your work and reaching out and telling them like, hey, I really like your company, what you're saying and your philosophy. And I'm really interested in working here. And that's super important that they'll work with you. And if you're qualified enough, they can create a position for you.
I love it. Chutzpah. That's what that is. Yeah. But not only is it that chutzpah, right? It's you pulled back a layer on something. Businesses don't always know what they need. Mm-hmm. They don't. Just like people, because people make up businesses. And so I love that you sold, right? And then they became convinced or persuaded that there was a need and then made the opportunity, right? And so, during kind of interesting transitional times as such that we're in, it can feel really hard, and it is, but also there's also been incredible demand in digital. So I think there's also really cool opportunities to create like you did, Maria's awesome story. Julie or Ariel, do you have any thoughts to add to what Maria shared?
Yeah, I was going to add, so I just dug up my cover letter that I used to apply to Nordstrom. And I literally, the first line is like, this is my dream job. And I remember that feeling really true at the time, because, I really idolized Nordstrom. And so I was really excited about it. And I just looked through my network. So I was like, who do I know that I can reach out to? And luckily I had one friend who was in my, someone who had been in my SVC program who wasn't in the UX team at Nordstrom, but she worked at Nordstrom, and she was able to refer me when I asked her. So I think that was really helpful. And then I also have pre-COVID times made it a point to go to a lot of types of networking events, not necessarily just UX, but all kinds of community events, get to know people. And I'd randomly met this woman who had formerly been a UX designer at Nordstrom. And so I just kind of hit her up out of the blue and was like, can we get coffee? And she knew the hiring manager and gave me some great advice about how to approach interviewing with her. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to know how much those two networking aspects played into the final result, but I think it never hurts. And it made me feel more confident anyway.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my experiences with networking, just definitely really unfolded organically for me, just already being at Amazon and having the rapport that I did with the design team there. So they were already interested in me because I had worked with them for about a year while I was in the program and just built that relationship, and they got to experience just my work ethic in general during the time that I was working with them as an EA. So they yeah, my interview process was definitely more tailored to my situation, and it was not a traditional interview loop. So when I had graduated, they were like, you should set up your portfolio review. So I scheduled my own portfolio review, and it had my 3 design directors, and then it got forwarded to everybody, like every hiring manager that reported into them. So it was like 15 people. And it was super intimidating at first, but I knew all of them going into it. So it wasn't really as bad as like my anxiety had built up in my head. But yeah, so they, after I had done a portfolio review with them, 2 of the hiring managers in that portfolio review followed up with me afterwards and had positions on their team that weren't posted online that they were considering me for. So yeah, I kind of had those 2 options available. And I also was very like networking, I think was something that was really successful on my journey, just because I'm also just really passionate about community building. But when I was in the program, I was also volunteering a lot in the design community. I was volunteering to be like greeters at like design conferences, and I was meeting a lot of people and building relationships that way. And I found that I just made really genuine and natural connections, and those people thought of me whenever they heard of positions opening up in their company. So yeah, I made a lot of natural connections that way.
Julie, as part of this panel, I did some lightweight, not crazy, background research on all of you. And I have to say that I am just so inspired by your story and how you've done a lot of storytelling about coming from a background as an executive assistant to where you are now. So I love it. I love that you're sharing that, because I think that people need to know, and this ties in to one of our questions in the chat. This ties in to this like understanding or line of thought around, you know, how are you going and how are you drawing that narrative line from where you were and where you're going, right? So Kato and Kato, sorry, make sure you pronounce it right. I'm hearing your question as, you know, how are you moving from your experience? And I think this was thinking about Chris, for example, your experience in teaching, and how did you take that and move forward into the work that you're doing now? And I think, you know, I'd love to hear you all kind of expand on that, and specifically for, you know, in the process of hiring or applying to things, like how did you talk about it? How did you package that, right? Because I think that, like, you know, I have a lot of strong opinions about this, but I am very curious to hear your opinions about, you know, when you went into that kind of process of applying and going through the hiring process, how did you talk about your previous experience, and how did you leverage it or not in that process? And maybe I'll ask Maria if you can go first on this one.
Yeah, so to start, like I definitely felt very green going into like these UX UI fields. I didn't know a lot about it. Like I had mentioned earlier, I decided to go back to school because I didn't know about it. I wanted to learn. And that in and of itself in an interview is a great thing to say. Like, you know, I saw something in me that was missing, so I chose to go back to school. It was time consuming, it cost money, but I did it, and it shows a lot of determination. And like that's a really great point to bring up in an interview, because that shows that you're someone who's willing to take extra steps for their job or for themselves or for their career. Also, prior to my current job at the agency, I had been working in a restaurant company. So the restaurant company owned 10 restaurants, and I did all their visual design, so menus, all like from anything that you can think of. And I really sat down one day and thought about how that job would apply to any other job. So I talked a lot about my strengths of being able to work on the fly and being flexible. And, you know, I made a joke, I think in one of my interviews, about how I'm able to keep calm under fire, because I had a story about one of the restaurants literally being on fire one and I had to deliver menus to them and get it done, and that kind of stuff. And just showing you really can find examples in anything in previous jobs where you can bring to. And I think after all of that, they sort of lost like any doubt that, I am green in UX and UI, but I have a lot of determination, and I can learn on the job, and I can make it happen no matter what. So.
Awesome. Ariel, do you want to comment on this one as well?
Sure. So I think that, I feel like you were saying something about this. I think we were talking about a sales pitch earlier. And I'm really interested in the idea of sales. I think it's exciting. And I've done a lot of sales work in the past, like selling clothing at a clothing store, for example, but actually really loved it. So when I think my first job, when I get up in front of a company that I'm interviewing with, is to make it abundantly clear through my sales pitch that I totally belong here. And I think what I've done in the interviews I've had is like cherry pick around my past and be like, what are the perfect moments in my life story that show you why this is inevitable, that I belong here. And I think it helped that, this was pretty easy to do at Nordstrom because, well, first of all, I've always loved writing and reading. So like that part felt natural. And then I've always been interested in fashion, and my first job was at J. Crew selling clothes. So that's how I started my story, which I would never mention that in probably any other interview, but it really made sense to sort of like talk about why my whole life up to this point, my whole life has been leading up to this point right now, why I'm in front of you, and just picking those moments that really sing and elevate that journey. And I guess a lot like how we think about a UX journey and like kind of what are those like markers, and just focusing on that. But the biggest part of my career story, which is going to show up no matter what kind of job I'm talking about, was working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York for 4 years. And I was working in the education department there. And so I've thought a lot about how that ties in with UX work because of the focus of our team being like, how do we make this super old stuffy place and all this old artwork feel really accessible and like relevant, and make it like so that anyone who walks into the museum, like you don't think you belong here, you don't think this is for you, but we meet you where you're at and like bring you in a way that's inviting, that's welcoming, that's accessible, and like speaks to your interests and needs, whether that's like literal like wheelchair accessibility or like language accessibility, or just like I'm bored and I want to find a way into this topic. So I think and also balancing curators who have a really particular perspective on academia and like scholarly approach versus like making it accessible to everyday people. So yeah, I think my background has a lot to do, has a lot of connections. But I'd say the biggest point is if you can just draw out like whatever you've done in your past, or who you are as a kid, whatever moments like really speaks to this job, I think that'll be really helpful.
That's great. And, just touching on what Ariel mentioned about museums and other types of areas of your life, I think a lot of times I've noticed with people I've mentored or other situations is it's really easy to downplay, right? Like it's really easy to downplay for yourself, like, oh, I don't know enough about accessibility, or I don't know about these things, or I haven't been a UX writer for 15 years, so I can't write, period. And I think that like, no, you're bringing all of this great experience from your old jobs and education. And yes, you need to learn certain new contexts, but you're also repackaging, right? You're also repackaging and rebranding skills that you've cultivated that are important and valuable to the new contexts that you're going into that is bringing also a diversity of thought that's really valuable. I don't know any UX leader over 45 that didn't start their career as like a hamburger flipper or like a QA analyst, because back then, like, there wasn't the field of UX branded as it was. So like some of my friends who are extremely senior SVPs or senior directors of UX, like they started out as executive assistants or copywriters in a book publishing, like physical book, no internet, right? And so I think it's always really important to remember that like you carry those strengths from those places that you've been on your journey, for sure. So awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. I want to take it in a slightly tactical direction in the application process. A little bit tied to a question from Nina Barnett in the chat, because I think that, you know, we've talked about kind of the overall application process, just like how you work through, how you got the connection, how you landed the opportunity. But then when you actually apply, you start to see a couple of things, right? They want your portfolio, they want references, they want like resume, cover letter, and to Nina's great question, oftentimes they want 3 to 5 years of experience. And I don't know if it's, and I'd love to hear from you all on the panel, but like when I was just starting out around 6 years ago, and I transitioned from a career in nonprofit program management, same thing. People were like, entry-level role, you need 3 to 5 years of experience. How did you help people, you know, through your materials or through how you talked to them? How did you help them feel confident that they could take this huge risk on you, that because you didn't have this 3 to 5 years of experience? Chris or Julie, maybe you all can kick us off on this topic.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. For me, I think it was, you know, as someone who was also changing fields, you know, kind of making a transition from education to UX, it was really about making the case that I did actually have that experience, and that the work that I'd been doing as a writer, as a teacher, as a builder of educational programming, I had been working in like with a UX approach to solving problems for my entire career. And that my time at SVC was like familiarizing myself with a different set of tools to solve problems in the same way. And so I actually, on my portfolio, my first case study is an example of how I applied a UX approach to solving a problem in designing an experiential learning program. And for me, like that like was a helpful way of making concrete like what that actually looks like when you claim that you've been working in that way before. But it also kind of helped like in some ways like shift the interview to my own terms, or to like a playing field that I was more comfortable playing on, I guess, right? So like, because I'm like giving them concrete examples of projects I've done in the past, like that's what we're talking about, instead of some of the like smaller case studies that come from course projects and stuff like that too. So so it was really kind of leaning into and owning the way that I had approached my past work through a kind of UX lens too.
Yeah, everything that everyone has said so far has really resonated with me. I saw this tweet the other day that really made me laugh, and it said, I'm starting to think that job postings are just satire. So yeah, I definitely understand just the pain and of having to go through that process. But I think just with my strengths and like networking and relationship building, and definitely like leveraging that for like my situation that I was in at the time, I knew that my current employer was willing to take a leap of faith on hiring me. And yeah, I mean, I will say you definitely have an advantage when you're already at the company, especially my job as an EA, when they got to just experience how I worked in general. I had built trust just by doing my EA job really well, and I fostered just genuine connections with people on the team and in the design community. And I was volunteering and just trying to put myself out there as much as possible. And like Ariel said, really think back to my past experience and think about all of the things that just make me a good designer because of the things that are like naturally my strengths. So I'm very people oriented, community oriented, and that's something that I talk about a lot in my interviews. And when I'm just trying to kind of bridge the gap on my past experience to being a UX designer. And yeah, I think I just demonstrated the right soft skills and the growth potential for sure, so that potential employers knew that I could learn the hard skills on the job and the more technical aspects of designing on the job. And that, I think that's something that was really key. Like if you're positioning yourself in an entry level designer role, it is really easy to just feel insecure about the lack of experience that you have. But I think as long as you can demonstrate that you have the growth potential, the drive, and the mindset that they're looking for, whether you're customer obsessed or a great system thinker or whatever it is that's going to stand out to them, and let them know that you have the skills from like previous careers and the right attitude to give them the confidence to take that leap of faith on you.
I love the framing of that leap of faith confidence. It's I often find, especially with UX designers just trying to break in, there's kind of this uncanny valley between, and I'm motioning with my arms if you can't see, right? There's this like uncanny valley where you're like, oh, I am having such a great experience with my cohort and I'm learning and I'm getting exposed to people. And then like, here's the job. And like in the valley, there's all this ambiguity around how are you closing that valley? How are you closing that gap? And some of the things Julie said, I thought were so great, such great nuggets that I really want to emphasize them and drive them home is, right, she leveraged what she had, right? She like the movie says, shake what your mama gave you, like like she had an amazing built-in trusted network because she killed it as an EA at Amazon, right? So all these people knew that she was an amazing worker and that she like was responsive and smart. And that goes so far, right? I have a mentee through SVC who is also at Amazon and did the same thing. He parlayed his experience in one area within the organism that is Amazon into transitioning into a UX role. So I think that's so smart, right? Like you leverage your strength in one kind of zone of your life, your community, or as you were saying, Julie, your soft skills, and you were like, hey, like you may feel shaky about me over here, but damn sure that I'm super solid and strong here. So, take a chance and know that I will hold you with strength over here as I build strength over here. And I think, and I want to call out that this is especially important in my point of view for a lot of underserved community members. I am a queer person and a person of color, and I know that a lot of times there's a lot of moments where people will be like, you don't pattern match with my expectation of like what I think should be an X role or whatever. And so the thing that Julie mentioned is so powerful to me because it works for everyone, no matter what background you come from. But especially for if you're coming from a community that isn't as represented in your company or your team, like knowing like, hey, I'm really strong in this area. How do I leverage it to take advantage of opportunity and gain strength in other area? It's like playing Risk, the board game. You like, at first I took over Australia and then I took over the rest of the world, is how I like to think about it. So hopefully I didn't drown you in fun metaphors. So what I want to do, because we've hit 7:02 p.m. Pacific time, because we are multi-time zone right now, is I want to take a quick bio break. The studies show that attention wanes after 45 minutes. I want to take a quick bio break. And when we return, we're going to make a content shift toward the actual interviewing process, and then save a little bit of time before our breakouts to discuss a little bit of some of the later questions that you all have asked about, like, oh, your first few weeks on the job. So yeah, so we'll come back in five minutes. Sound good? So let's do 8 after, right? So that's 7:08 PT, 10:08 ET, etc. You know what I'm talking about. All right, back soon. All right, welcome back. If you have accidentally Zoom bombed into this space, this is the Tales of Newly Hired panel hosted by the School of Visual Concepts. I am your host, Alex Tran. Yeah, so great to have you all back. Awesome. So I think people are back. Yeah, people look pretty back. Also, super random before we move on to more content. Sarah Jo Kinslow, I don't know if you're back from break, but your profile picture is amazing. It's so festive. I love it. Y'all should peek that later. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the comment, Sarah. So we talked a little bit about the kind of application process, getting things ready, some of the kind of meta topics that span, your confidence, your storytelling, your pitching, your background, and like translating it into the work. I want to now focus on kind of the interview process itself, and then moving into a little bit about like the first day of the job, kind of like your goals, because I think that's some of the things that people are asking in the chat. A lot of these things, by the way, that we're discussing, there's so many blogs on uxdesign.cc and other things that go into a lot of logistics. Here, I'm explicitly focusing on the panelists telling us like their personal story and process around it, because you can find a lot of the kind of hot tips on a lot of these things. So but maybe in the breakout room, if people want like more tactical, like tackling and blocking, we can go deeper into that too. So for the application process, I was a little curious to hear from you all just a little bit about how it went, or sorry, not application process, interview, we're on interview now, interview process, how it went for you, and was there anything that you were surprised about or unprepared for, that you would love to have known when you started, so you can give that wisdom to our audience so that they don't make any of those mistakes. Maybe Maria or Ariel, do you want to kick us off?
Start. So the interview process with Green Rubino was great. I knew right away that I wanted to work there based on their interview process. So they had me stay in a room, and then people kind of filtered in and out. So I stayed in the room for like half the day. And at first it was the creative director and the assistant creative director. And then it went to the developer and the project manager, and then the web director, and then eventually the owner of the company. Sorry, I have a new puppy who is deciding to play right now in this meeting. So it was really great. And one of the things I would say that I was not so prepared for was actually how much they asked me about my life and my interests, like totally not related to design at all. They had spent the time reviewing my portfolio before the interview, and really dug in. So when they sat down, they asked me a couple questions about just design and how I design and my background, and then just started asking me like what kind of restaurants I liked and what neighborhood I lived in, and my personal life and just my interests and stuff like that. And that's what they seemed most genuinely interested in. And I realized they were trying to get sort of like a vibe check on me to be like, can I work here? And you forget that these are going to be your coworkers. You spend so much time with them. You don't want to be like uptight and only talk about this. So I wish I'd prepared a little bit more, but eventually they got me to relax a little bit and I was able to talk about that. So, but I really liked it, as opposed to other interviews I had been in where they kind of sat me in a conference room and then the entire agency came in and sat down, and I was sort of having to present in front of like 15 people at once, and I was really on the spot, and it felt a little cold in other interviews, and this one felt a lot more warmer. So that was an indicator to me that I was in the right place.
I'll share my experience with Nordstrom. So I applied for the job, and then I had a call with the recruiter. That was the first step, which was pretty straightforward. Like, what's your background and what are you looking for? And she actually said, like, I love that you went to SVC. And I was like, yeah. So that was cool.
I
And kind
put
of
that up on the
unexpected.
SBC quote board.
Yes. Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear that feedback. So that went well. And then I had a coffee chat with the hiring manager, which was similar but more in depth, obviously. And then I had to complete a UX rating exercise, which I found is pretty typical of at least UX writing jobs. And then once I handed that in and they liked it, then I had an on-site where I had to present that exercise as well as 2 other case studies to a room of like 10 or so people. And then I had to do some like one-on-one or two-on-one sort of behavioral interviews. And here's what my advice is on that. I think behavioral interviews are really hard, or at least they're really hard for me. And I felt like in the interviews I've had, a lot of questions are going to be, or there's inevitably going to be some question like, when did you have a challenging time, particularly with like your partners or your stakeholders? And although I had all these great experiences at SVC, well, I personally tend to avoid conflict anyway. So I didn't have a lot of moments I felt like I could talk to. And also I didn't feel like I'd really I hadn't had any like intense relationships with stakeholders. So if I'd go back, I'd try to find more ways to like get in there with stakeholders in some way in my passion projects or my capstone, so that I could talk about those experiences. But I'll tell you how I did answer the question, which is so ridiculous, but apparently it worked. I started talking about how I'd like recently been on a road trip with my family, and like the tire had popped while we were on the highway. And I talked about how like played this role that I feel like I'm good at, of like being calm in a crisis and kind of like negotiating the different personalities that were happening in this really scary moment. So, you can pull an answer out of kind of nowhere if you don't have one that's totally relevant. But I'd recommend trying to find some relevant experiences if you can.
That's great. And I want to, Ariel, can you unpack a little bit for us? You just said behavioral interviews, and I'm not sure everyone in the audience has the same framing for that term. Can you
Yeah,
say what you mean by that?
totally. So behavioral interview is when an interviewer will ask you, tell me about a time when blank. So in this case, it was something like, tell me about a time when you were in a challenging experience and there was some conflict going on within a working group, or tell me about a time you didn't get along with your manager or you had a disagreement, or tell me about it could be about the most thing you're most proud of. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but they kind of are getting a sense of like, they want you to talk about your work and talk about your experience and how you work by referencing specific moments in your working past. That's
great. The reason why I thought it was great for you to unpack that is every one of you will get this conflict question, like no doubt. So I don't know if anyone has been in debate or mock trial back in high school times, but they have little index cards where they prepare narratives, core narratives that they can refer back to for different questions, so that they can tackle problems quickly and efficiently. And I would encourage you all, similar to Ariel's amazing car trip story, like from what you can and as much as you can with stakeholders, with teammates, like harvest those stories, document those stories, because those are leverage, those are ammo for how you navigate those questions. And it gives you confidence, right? That you prepared for that moment, because it's coming. That question is coming. It's like, it'll take a lot of forms, but you need to be prepared for it. Absolutely. Love that highlighting. So I think some of you talked about the group interview, the behavioral interview, the exercise. I think some of the interest on the chat is also reflecting on like the other parts of the interview process, like maybe the portfolio review or the whiteboarding. I'd love for you all to unpack. So maybe Julie or Chris, you can share a little bit how that went for you. And I think someone asked Chris specifically about the whiteboarding, but either of you, if you have experienced that, I think it'd be great to talk about.
Sure, yeah. So, you know, I could be wrong about this. I may be the only person up here that has interviewed remotely entirely. I don't know if that's true or not, but it might be. And I would say that one thing I feel like, you know, listening to Maria's story about like having those sort of quiet moments between the intensity of the parts of your interview where you're just kind of like being personal with other people, like that's one thing that I found was really missing from the process when you're doing it virtually. Like it feels much more distant in that way, right? And like you have fewer of those moments where you're walking from like one room to the next where like you can be sort of personal. So like that's kind of a barrier to like keep in mind as you're engaging with people virtually too, that like you have to kind of like create space for those moments too. But that was not your question, Alex, at all. So
no, that's great. No, everything you said was amazing. And I just wrote in the chat, I was like, I got to play ping pong. Part of their behavioral interviewing in my current job was like, Alex, you have to play ping pong with us so we can like assess your playfulness. I don't know. your humanity writ large. So no, I think that was awesome to share. But yeah, please talk a little bit about your whiteboarding.
Yeah. So as part of the interview process at Primera, I did both a case study presentation, which I literally verbatim, Larry saw me give my capstone, not my capstone, my portfolio presentation for SGC. I literally gave almost verbatim that presentation in my case study, my portfolio presentation. And a challenge of doing it virtually, like I like didn't have the right permissions to share my slides on the screen. And so I basically had to just say, screw it, I'll send you a PDF of the slides later. I'm just gonna give this talk. And so I just delivered the talk without slides. Ended up going well, but it was definitely like a moment of crisis there too. I prepared a lot for the whiteboarding exercise, and I prepared in sort of the way that I learned to do it, which was like you're working in sort of a product design capacity. You're working towards creating a UI that is solving a particular problem, and you're focused on the various steps of the design process along the way. The whiteboarding challenge that I was confronted with in a strategy role was really, really different. They were asking me to do something totally different than I had prepared for. They gave me basically like a one-page, super detailed brief and said, show us how you would work with like 6 different stakeholders to approach and solve this problem. And I had it was another one of those moments of panic of like, oh, this is not the thing that I've been training for or the thing that I've been preparing for. But I had a piece of advice from a friend of mine who worked at Amazon also, who was like, when in doubt, focus on the customer. Just like drill down and like follow where that takes you, which is like very basic advice, but like a nice kind of fallback approach to have. I did the best I could in like doing what they were asking me to do and doing it in a like customer-centered way. And it went really pretty well. They gave me like 30 minutes to do it myself, and then I presented it to a group of 6 or 7 people, answered questions about my approach, about what I would do next, all of that. It ended up being really fun, but it's it's one of those really anxiety-inducing experiences. I think I woke up like 4:30 in the morning that day, just like, and I'm up. Let's go. Let's do this. Like, but yeah, that was my experience with those two parts of the process.
That's great. And I'm realizing that we are close to our time for our breakout sessions. So I wanted to thank you all of our panelists for sharing your amazing stories. It's awesome. I think it's, for me, it's really inspiring to hear people from different walks of life finding their, connection to UX through everything that they're passionate about, interested in, and also like building a career in this area. So yeah, kudos to all of you. It's been a few years, but like I can remember the the like journey and the angst for me personally of making that transition. So bravo to you all. And bravo to the audience, because you all are going to make that same leap. To kind of close us in the questioning portion before we move to I'll shill for this book. Yeah, I put a book in the chat, and there's other great book recommendations as well in there. Before we move to the breakouts, I wanted to, our panels are disappearing. I wanted our panelists to maybe just share a quick sentence or two about where, based on what they've learned from their current role and the first few months or weeks or now year that they've been there, where is that driving them in terms of their future? And this is a question purely taken from one of our awesome audience members, and I thought it was such a good, nice way to round out the discussion. So, Julie, if you don't mind me nominating you to go first, if you can say a few words and then hand the baton to the next person, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. What's next for me? I think for me, I'm really focused on just continuing to grow my craft. So I know that's going to come with just time and experience and getting to work on a variety of different projects, but I'm just really open to just learning new disciplines and getting to flex my skills wherever possible. I'm super thankful for the community that SVC has built, because I took a motion, a class on Adobe After Effects just a few months ago, because I was trying to leverage some information that some new skills that I could learn from there for some motion concepts that I was working on for Amazon. So I still think of SVC in my learning journey. And yeah, that's just kind of what I want to continue to do, is just grow my craft even more. I will pass it off to Maria.
Okay, next steps for me. I think that I made a transition from more traditional visual design into digital, or print design into digital, but I never fully let go of print and visual design. So I think next steps for me are building a bridge between the two. And I've always wanted to be an art director or a digital art director. And so learning as much as I can about both and really try to carve out my own path to continue getting to be both. I'm also a huge advocate of being a forever student. So I'm sure you'll see me back at SVC at some point in a class when I feel like I'm lacking in something. I think that it's a really great opportunity to inspire new creativity in people. So just continuing learning and continuing exploring my field and trying new things. So, and I will pass it off to Chris.
Great. It feels a little presumptuous for me to be talking about next steps. I'm in the third week in my new job. But one of the things I really like about a strategy role is that you get to touch lots of different parts of the business. And so I'm really looking forward to just gaining exposure and learning a lot about the end-to-end design process in a number of different realms, and kind of finding my path forward. I'm also excited about staying connected to SBC. I was a TA for a presentation skills class recently, and doing this panel has been a lot of fun. So like to stay connected to a learning community as well. Yeah. And Ariel.
All right, Ariel, you got
Yeah.
it. Thank you. So I just got this really cool feedback from my team that I'm like, they like see me as like the team therapist or something. So I like this idea of like becoming a UX therapist. I don't know what that means yet, but I like the idea of it. I also really love the idea of like leaning into to my interest in taking a more strategic lens versus, you know, more entry level like tactical work. I think accessibility is amazing and like much needed as an expertise in the field. Love to learn more about that. And I want to do more of this kind of panel activities, mentoring, teaching in the future, and love the opportunity to just share my story and like help others along their journey.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. We had some more questions roll into the chat, but I think, and we're like perfectly on time, I think we're reserving this last 30 minutes, if I remember our agenda correctly, for specific breakout rooms. So anyway, quick twinkle, clap hands to our amazing panelists before we do that. Yay, great job. So yeah, I guess I'll hand it to you, Larry, to break us out into our rooms, or whoever.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. But first, this for you. You did such a great job. You know, so I've been in your unenviable chair before, leading panel discussions. Sometimes it's like 15 minutes, we're done. Everybody's out of questions. This looks like this one should be about, you know, a 10-part series. We've got so much more stuff we need to cover. So maybe we can cajole and beg our panel and Alex to come back again for at least part 2. Because I think, right, we have a lot more stuff we need to ask. The way that breakout rooms work, this is an experiment on our part. We thought some of you have not seen each other maybe since you were in a class here. So we're gonna break it out by when you graduated from a program here. If you didn't graduate from a program here, we've got a couple of breakout rooms for you too. And we don't care. You can bust into somebody else's room if there's someone in particular you wanted to ask a question of. So this is like a total jump ball. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we'll be here for the next 25 minutes or so. Panelists, if you can stay, awesome. If you can't, thank you so much for doing this. And it's not only great to see you again, but it's especially great to hear from you again and hear about your journey. And we are so proud of you because you're just killing it, which is so wonderful. So anyway, you get to pick your breakout rooms, and there once you get in, there's a button down at the bottom that says ask for help. And if I don't know what kind of help you need, but we'll bust in and move you around, bail you out, tell you one of those dad jokes, whatever you ask for, we'll do it. And if you have to go, then good night. And thank you so much for being here. I for one, I'm looking forward to part 2. Okay, breakout.
Larry,
Yes.
do we have who made the breakout rooms?
Me.
I see no breakout rooms. Oh, there I do.
Just scroll to the bottom. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Can I stay on
Yes.
another week? Okay,
Yeah,
so there they go. There
Yep.
they go. Pick where you want to go. Or you can hang out here in the main room with us.
All right, I see John and Catherine have gone to their rooms. Susan's gone to random folks meetup space. So if you don't see, there's a little breakout room icon that's 4 squares at the bottom. So you can choose there.
Thanks, Alex. I should have said that.
No worries.
No,
It's a very diminutive and
Well-
assuming icon.
and I mostly do breakout rooms from this end, not the other end. And I have no idea what the user experience is actually like.
It's like a magic door you don't know exists. All right, I'm gonna go into the random.
Can I ask, Larry, can I ask you a quick question? So I didn't
Sure.
actually attend you guys' program, but I'm still more in that student phase. So I see this one that's like pro UX and UI designers versus
Yeah.
just the random folks. And I am going to UX and UI. So do you have to be like, like what does the pro mean?
Well, I don't know, because only one person's in there. But the theory was, if there were people who were working in the field, and whether they, because the breakouts for by the year, that was kind of more like class reunion action. But the thought was, if they're just people that are working in the field and would be willing to share some advice, that was where we were hoping they'd go hang out. So somebody needs to go in there, and there's another one. So go check it out. Tell us, and then come back if it was a dud.
I'm not sure how to get into the room here.
Are you trying to go there?
Yeah, what do you do? I'm
Click
going
on the breakout rooms.
Yep.
Oh, you know why? Talk about bad UX. So when it brings up the list of all the rooms, and you'll see to the right of the room title is a number.
There we go.
Right? Isn't
Got
that stupid? That's really bad. Okay. Jade and Sarah, you just want to, and Emily, you want to hang out with us? You have to unmute though if you want to be our friend.
Is this the best party room? It
No.
seems like it is.
Hard. Look at us. Does it look like the best party room?
I don't know what to ask, because every time I ask any advice for seasoned designers who are transitioning, every single time nobody ever answers it.
Well, why don't
Well,
you go into
that's-
a room and ask? It's probably
That's
a great
'cause
thing to do.
I don't see very many people here that meet that spec.
Yeah, I don't know who to ask.
Well, I'm going to tell you, Ann Dixon in the 2019 room.
I know her.
Okay, there you go. And I will introduce you, they're not here, but I will introduce you to a couple of our grads that have a very similar background to yours. And, but we'll have to do that, separately via email,
Yes,
but we can do that.
I think I might do that instead.
Okay.
I've been on the computer all day.
What's your record for Zoom calls in a day?
Me?
Yeah.
I like, I always offer phone option whenever I talk to potential people. I'm surprised people still remember that option.
Phone is having a resurgence.
Yeah,
People are going back to phone.
yeah, it's good. I'm
Yeah,
kind of getting spoiled, because whenever they say, no, we have this, sometimes their business, I don't know if they record them or whatever, and they're like, oh, we have to do it via Zoom. I'm like, darn, I gotta put makeup on, and at least the top part of my body.
I
has to
know, me
look
too.
Professional.
I know. Oh, Larry, by the way, we have a request for a dad joke before Sarah has to leave.
Yeah,